There's been quite a bit of talk these days about Doctor Who's ratings and audience scores and the like, so I thought it would be apropos to shed a little light on the matter, specifically explaining what ratings and scores are actually for, how they are calculated, and what value they may have to the Doctor Who fan. All of the rating types we'll be looking at fall into the category of sample surveys. A sample survey is a study that obtains data from a subset of a population in order to estimate the larger population's attributes. In this case, their behavior or opinions related to Doctor Who. So let's start with the ratings. I'm going to focus first on the ratings in the UK, where Doctor Who is made, and the location of its primary market. The organization responsible for providing the official measurements of UK television audiences is the Broadcasters Audience Research Board, known as BARB for short. BARB is a not-for-profit limited company, and it's one of the UK's joint industry currencies. Joint industry currencies provide audience numbers and planning and trading metrics for the media that they represent. They're owned by the industry. Media owners, advertisers, agencies, all working in concert to produce a credible, objective trading currency for their own medium. BARB currently measures over 250 TV channels available in the UK. There are some non-reported channels, and the information is still captured, but it's just not reported individually. It is included, though, in the overall TV viewing. Now, BARB provides many different viewing statistics, including who is watching, what are they watching, when are they watching, which screen are they watching on, and how did the content get to the screen. BARB has two sources of data: people-based data and device-based data. Let's talk about each of those briefly. People-based data, that's the BARB panel. The BARB panel is a sample of television-owning private homes, and they're designed to represent the viewing behavior of the whole UK population. There's some 27 million TV households in the UK. But the panel is selected to be representative of each ITV and BBC region with predetermined sample sizes. Now, TV viewing is measured and reported every single day, and within each BARB home, there's a meter. All panel household members age 16 and up and their guests register their presence by the press of a button when in a room with a TV set on. They then deregister their presence when they leave the room. All data is then downloaded overnight and loaded into databases the following morning so that all the subscribers can access the data. So how do they get people onto this panel? How are they chosen? Well, that's with the establishment survey. That helps BARB find homes that are willing to be members of the panel. Ipsos Mori is the company that interviews like over 1,000 households each week for the BARB establishment survey. And their target is to maintain a panel of 5,300 homes. So that's how many households are on the panel. And they're representative of the household type, of the demographics of the population, the TV platform, the geography. And although we're talking about 5,300 homes, there are in fact over 12,000 people living in these homes, so there's more people than there are homes. But why use a representative panel instead of just sourcing data directly from the devices used to watch television? Well, the device-based data alone has some limitations. It's unable to identify who's in front of the screen and what type of person they are. And it's very important to have that knowledge. You need to understand who is watching, what their demographic viewing profiles are, the number of viewers per screen, all of that, the program reach. That's the only way you can know is if you know who is actually pressing the button. Now, I told you that there were two sources of information. BARB does collect device-based data too. Whenever anyone in the UK watches a broadcaster video on demand service on PCs, tablets, or smartphones, that data is gathered through the devices. And another company, Kantar Media, is the one that helps them with that. They work with the broadcasters to embed software code into their video-on-demand services across all the different online platforms. Well, that's called tagging. Yeah, then that tagging implementation is independently audited to ensure that the data meets their standards. So then what BARB does is it takes the two sources of information, the information from the panel and the information from the device-based data, and uses a process called dovetail fusion to give the full report, to give the full ratings stats. Now, what are these stats for? There are three reasons that they take these measurements. Okay? Number one, it's to provide program makers with an assessment so they can figure out how to improve their product. Number two, it enables broadcasting companies to demonstrate the level of satisfaction with their output that they get, and they need to demonstrate that to their shareholders, the government, or a franchisor. So it's a way of showing, here's how satisfied people are with the show or with our channel. And number three, it plays a role in the buying and selling of advertiser space, because if you can tell an advertiser, oh, see, this many people watch this show, that's going to help them make a decision about whether they want to put an ad on there or not. And the more people that are watching it, the more money you can charge the advertiser for placing their ad on that show. Now, please note, and this cannot be overemphasized, that the role of these BARB ratings is not to promote the medium to the public. It's to produce and present standard, robust, and comprehensive metrics that are transparent and open to scrutiny, which can be used in decision making. Inaccurate figures are going to result in poor choices, so it's actually in the interests of everyone involved to make sure that these numbers are as reliable and precise as possible. BARB works for all the channels, not just one. The reasons why overnight viewing figures are important are not entirely the same as they used to be. Today we can watch a show anytime we wish. Appointment television is the new standard. When people want to sit and watch the tube on a given evening, instead of flipping through the channels to see what's on, they generally ask themselves or someone else, hey, what do you want to watch? And the sky is basically the limit. They may have a series or a movie on their watch list, which they can access immediately by simply streaming it on Netflix or whatever other app they're using. Today, someone is not likely to say, oh, there's nothing else on, so I guess I'll watch Doctor Who. There's always something great available to watch. The time a show airs is therefore much less important than in the old days. In today's media, the shows that get the most views on the actual day and at the time aired are, 1, the reality shows, especially the competitions and the ones that have live voting. 2, live broadcasts of some special event. And 3, evening soaps and dramas that get a lot of water cooler talk the next day. People who don't wish to be spoiled usually prefer to see it before everyone starts talking about it. Doctor Who historically has fared well in the overnights because it tends to fall into this category. And fans, of course, can't wait to see it. As the significance of overnights declines, the chief interest that TV channels now have in overnight viewing figures is for advertising purposes. They want as many people as possible tuned into their channel at the same time to raise the value of the advertising space. But for a channel like the BBC, that doesn't matter because they don't have commercials. So for them, since people can watch a show whenever they want, the overnights are not much more than a curiosity. So then you might ask, why do they care about the time placement of the program then? Well, part of it is that the old mentality is still a bit difficult to let go of, and when these overnight charts are published, being on them makes them definitely feel more relevant. It's mainly about perception among their peers. I mean, how would they look if they weren't at the top of the charts, right? They may hope that some people might just randomly tune in on the night of transmission. Even a few thousand might make it worth it. But these days, if they do tune in, it's probably a deliberate choice. What the BBC really cares about is how many people overall watch their shows in a given week and in a given month. consolidated ratings are more significant than overnight ratings because they take into account not only all ways of watching the program, but also all time-shifted viewing, which would be all views of the program beyond the first day. So that means that anyone who records the program and then watches it later, everyone that watches it on demand, everyone that streams it, would be included in the consolidated figure. We can say then, in all probability, whoever wanted to watch Doctor Who will be in that group. They also have a 28-day consolidated, which ensures that no one is left out. What a fan should keep in mind then is that overnights will most certainly be affected by the day and time shown, but the consolidated figures will not. They erase the advantage of a show airing on a favorable day and time, or the disadvantage of a show airing at an unfavorable day and time. For that reason, we may rightly make a straightforward comparison between seasons, even if the show aired on a different day when we're using consolidated figures. Now, as far as the ratings go, what is considered good? For the purpose of advertising, it would be the actual numbers that matter because that would be how many people see an ad. But for measuring success, it is not, in fact, a specific number range that matters. The success of the show is measured against the performance of the other shows. So what the BBC cares about is the chart position, because then we can see how the show fares against the opposition. Keep in mind that when looking at chart position, BARB calculates it for individual episodes, not individual programs. So as you can see here, this is for the week of November 12th and November 18th. Several episodes of Strictly Come Dancing and Coronation Street are listed separately. So whereas Doctor Who is placed 9th for the week, actually only 5 different shows beat it. So you can say it was the 6th most popular show of the entire week. Well, what about in North America? Well, the same type of measurement is done. In this case, it's Nielsen Media Research that does the national measurements. They become kind of the de facto service for the television industry in the United States and Canada. And it functions much like BARB does. Nielsen uses statistical sampling to rate the shows. They create a sample audience, just like BARB does, and then they count how many in that audience views each program. And then they extrapolate from the sample, and they can make estimates about the entire population watching the show. And the company, similarly, gets around 5,000 households to agree to be part of the representative sample for the estimates that they make. There are, in fact, 99 million households in the United States that have TVs. So when you think about it, the 5,000 household sample, it's about the same size as BARB's, but it's measuring a much larger population. So in order to be accurate, the key is to make sure that your sample is representative. Now, participants in the Nielsen's national sample, they are randomly selected. It's very important to randomly select them. But you must know everything about the people that are part of the sample, right? All of their demographics in order to understand what part of the population they are representing. To make sure that everything's accurate, the company uses audits and quality checks and regularly compares the ratings it gets from the different samples and the measurement methods. All right, this research is worth billions of dollars because just like in the UK, advertisers pay to air their commercials on the TV programs using the rates that are based on the Nielsen data. And programmers also use the data to decide which shows they want to keep and which shows they want to cancel. So yeah, these are all metrics that the media itself uses, that it needs in order to make good decisions regarding their content. So the primary beneficiaries of the stats are not the public. They are the creators, the broadcasters, the advertisers. So the question here is, of what interests are ratings for Doctor Who fans? Well, it basically just satisfies our curiosity. That's about it. We'd like to know how the show is faring, you know. And since ratings affect broadcasters' decisions about the show and what they're going to do with it, we can sometimes anticipate what decisions might be made based on the ratings that we see. But of course, a lot of that is speculative, because there are many other factors that weigh into the decisions that broadcasters make. Now, there are limitations to what ratings can reveal. Perhaps we need to remind ourselves that the number of people watching a program, while an indication of popularity and is of great interest to advertisers because they want to know how many people are watching, it has something to do with the quality of the show, but it's not a one-to-one ratio here, right? Just as there have been many blockbuster movies that have been crap, or box office failures that have actually been really good, so it can be with TV shows. We as Doctor Who fans know that some really great episodes of the program have had low ratings. I mean, I'm a big fan of The Curse of Fenric, you know. Really bad ratings. Also, some awful episodes have had high ratings. Season 17 of the classic series. Oh man. Really high ratings. Not the greatest quality of stories. We know also that better PR and marketing can bring in more viewers, which is a factor completely separate from whether the show itself is any good. For this reason, the BBC doesn't merely rely on how many people watch their shows in order to determine quality. Enter the Appreciation Index. The Appreciation Index is the main currency inside the BBC for measuring how much the audience appreciates and enjoys BBC programs. A continuous BBC survey called the Pulse is designed to assess what audiences think of the programs they've seen on TV and listen to on the radio on a daily basis. It's an online survey, and it's been running since 2005, but it isn't just open to anybody. The Pulse survey is given to a panel. Very much like the BARB ratings have a panel, the Pulse has a panel who are invited to complete the survey every day to say what they've watched and listened to, and then what they thought of each program. And respondents are asked to score the programs that they watched or listened to the previous day, and they score it 1 out of 10. 10 is the highest score, 1 is the lowest score. Then the average of all these marks is multiplied by 10 to give us the appreciation score, the AI. The daily reporting panel is a representative sample. It's weighted for age, social grade, gender, whether there's children in the household, what region they live in, and so forth. And that's ensuring that the sample is representative of the UK as a whole. Because the BBC has several years of AI data from this panel going all the way back to 2005, they're now able to build up these benchmarks so they understand what makes a good score, what makes a bad score, and so forth. Generally speaking, anything 80 and above is considered doing well. Below 80, room for improvement. I speak very generally. So there's other types of elements in the Pulse survey that we don't actually get. The amount of effort people took to view the program is measured. Whether the viewers found it entertaining is also important to them. They ask questions like whether the program is fresh and new. In the case of factual programs, whether the viewers learned anything from it. The type of program it is, changes in the TV market, the size of the audience. So they actually use the BARB ratings in conjunction with their AI to weigh the importance of the AI. There are, in fact, programs that are niche programs. They're very targeted, so they're only supposed to be for a limited number of viewers. Now, a question may come up. Are AIs reliable? Some have suggested that maybe AIs skew high because an audience that watches a program probably likes it in the first place. And there's, that makes sense. Like, oh, well, if you're only gauging the people who watch the program, well, the fact that they watch the program proves that they like the program, so they're going to rate it higher. Yeah, it is true. But who else are you going to poll? You can't poll people who didn't watch it, right? So yeah, the AI could be higher for that reason, but also keep in mind that the AI could also skew lower because if they are fans of the program, if they like the program in general, if they're disappointed by the episode, the AI score might skew lower than normal. Like just some person watching the show who never watches it, they might not be as disappointed and they wouldn't rate it so low. So it goes both ways. Now, I don't know what factors in addition to the AI the BBC uses in-house to assess Doctor Who. Nor do we get the full results of the Pulse survey for Doctor Who. We just get the AI score and that's it. So, a lot of this is guesswork by the fan. Again, as in the case of the BARB ratings, okay? The AI and the supplemental stats are not used for self-promotion. There are other vehicles for that. Accurate numbers are needed for the purpose of measuring success so that informed decisions can be made. So you can rest assured that the BBC is going to try to get the most accurate AI scores possible. It helps them. It serves their interest to have an accurate AI. Now recently, a lot has been made, by Doctor Who fans in fact, about Rotten Tomatoes, the website Rotten Tomatoes. Rotten Tomatoes is a place that formerly was mainly all for movies. You go there to get, and originally I think it was Rotten Tomatoes just gave us critic scores, but now they also give us audience scores. So some people go to Rotten Tomatoes to get some kind of information about the quality of a show, like Doctor Who, because they do TV series now too. Rotten Tomatoes has no personal opinion about a film. What it does is collect other people's opinions. Rotten Tomatoes' greatest interest is gauging critical consensus. That's what they take the most pride in. A Rotten Tomatoes score, critical score, that's the one that you see on the left. That represents the percentage of critics who felt positively about a given film, or TV series in this case. The opinions of about 3,000 different critics are included in the site's scores. Now, not every critic reviews every film or TV season, so any given score is not going to have that many critics scoring it. You might get a few hundred, or even less. So you can see here in the case of Doctor Who Season 10, you've only got 11 critics reviewing it. In the case here of Doctor Who Season 11, you have 38 critics reviewing it. That's pretty darn low, actually. Now, keep in mind here that the scores don't include just anyone who calls himself a critic. It's not just anybody that has a movie blog or has written reviews. You actually have to meet a series of criteria set by Rotten Tomatoes in order to become an approved tomato meter critic. And some of those criteria are, I think you have to have at least 2 years experience of being a movie critic and lots of people reading your reviews. Well, some critics actually upload their own reviews onto Rotten Tomatoes. They could even choose their own quotes to put up there, and they could even choose whether they think the movie is fresh or rotten. There's only two choices, by the way, fresh or rotten. That's the thing. Rotten Tomatoes expects the critics to just go one way or the other way. I mean, the whole review could be there, and the reviews are usually nuanced, but they have to be either fresh or rotten. That's it. There's only two choices. Other critics, they just, Rotten Tomatoes goes out and grabs them and puts them on the site. And then the staff has to figure out whether they think the review is fresh or rotten. And when you get like kind of middle of the road reviews, it's sometimes hard for the staff to figure out whether they should rate it fresh or rotten, but they do make a choice. If it's over 60% positive, then the movie is considered fresh. If it's 59% and under, they're considered rotten. So then what you're seeing here for the critic score is it's the percentage of the scores that are fresh over those that are rotten. Okay, it's a fresh to rotten rating. And so if you see the designated fresh seal, that just means 75% fresh rating or above. And then you get the designated fresh seal. But here's the issue. If a critic gives a film a mixed review, but it leans positive, okay, that's going to receive the same weight in the average score as a critic who just raves about the movie and thinks it's the greatest thing he ever saw. right? They're both going to get a fresh score and be weighted exactly the same. So when you think about it, theoretically, it's possible for a Rotten Tomatoes critics rating to be like at 100%, but be made up entirely of critics' middling to positive reviews. But you see the 100%, you're like, wow, it must be great. But see, now that you know how it works, you know that that's not necessarily true. It goes the other way, too. If half the critics sort of like the movie, but they lean more towards the dislike, that's going to be rated rotten no matter what. So you could have like a really, really low score, but, doesn't mean that the critics completely hate it. So the opinions tend to cluster. A film's Rotten Tomatoes score, average score, is not necessarily going to respond to any single critic's view. It's just an imprecise estimate of what would happen if you mashed together all the different tomato meter critics. If you just put all the tomato meter critics into a room and said, thumbs up or thumbs down, everybody, and took a snapshot. Now, with TV seasons, often critics will give a score after viewing only a couple of episodes. Others might wait until the season is over, but that means that unlike movies, the critic's score sometimes doesn't reflect a critical opinion about the entire season. To be honest, most critics feel that Rotten Tomatoes oversimplifies criticism, and they're not helpful. They think it's a detriment to the critics, it's a detriment to the audiences, it's a detriment to the movies themselves. Critics generally don't say, hey, go to Rotten Tomatoes, everybody. Critics want you to read their individual reviews. In some cases, a film really is almost universally considered to be amazing, excellent, or a complete catastrophe. But not usually. Critics who take their job seriously don't do that. On YouTube, you might find people who just say something totally sucked or said something is totally awesome. But critics, they think about a film. They analyze it. They don't judge it on one or two things. They try to ruminate over it and contextualize it. And they usually come away with mixed reviews. Some things in the movie work. Some things don't. The acting was good, but the writing was bad. Or the filmmaking is subpar, but the story is good, is imaginative. It's a great idea. That's why a lot of them use several star ratings. Audiences are a little different. They like giving it either 5 stars or 1 star. Those are their favorites. All right, now, what about the other score to the right here, the audience score? This was added, the audience score, it's denoted here by a popcorn bucket, to Rotten Tomatoes because audiences were kind of like, well, we want to make ratings too, so they kind of threw them a bone. But what is it? Well, it's the percentage of self-selecting volunteers who have rated the movie or TV show positively. So it's the same thing as the critic score. It's an average of thumbs up to thumbs down. And I think it's 3 stars or up is the thumbs up. And so they just, how many people rated it fresh as compared to how many rated it rotten. Rotten Tomatoes, by the way, isn't the only site that tracks the opinions of self-selecting volunteers. Metacritic does it. IMDb also does it. Metacritic, like Rotten Tomatoes, is primarily interested in tabulating the critics' opinions, but they do, collect grades from the audiences and display them on the site. Seems to make people happy. IMDb doesn't collect critic grades at all. They just give you the audience scores. Now, one thing you may have noticed, and it's the case with the current season of Doctor Who, the audience score is often out of step with the critical score. Why? Sometimes the difference is extremely significant. And you notice it because here they are sitting side by side, and they're so different from one another. Movie makers with critically derided films sometimes love to highlight the difference between critic scores and audience scores because, well, they can spin it to say something positive about their film. Basically, the argument is this. Oh, those snobby critics think they're so much better than everyone else, but they're just disconnected from the regular people, the real people, They can't be trusted, right? That plays very well for their movies because they're trying to get people to go see them. But you have to understand, that's just PR spin. Critics are not a publicity arm for the movie industry. They're not. Their job is not to sell movies. Okay? They don't belong to the movie industry at all. You know, there is a popular conspiracy theory out there that somehow critics are bribed by the movie industry. So the idea is that they're shills, and I guess the film companies are paying critics to rate their films highly so that people go see it. Of course, that doesn't explain why critics have low scores. Well, I guess you could say that, oh, well, the competing movie companies are trying to get critics to, they're paying them off so that they rate their competitors' films lower? Something like that. Boy, this is a lot of money that the movie industries would be giving out, isn't it? Do you know how many critics you would have to bribe in order to, like, talk about like a bigger movie here? Hundreds of critics? What would you have to pay them? Thousands of dollars each in order to get them to... I guess the first thing to point out is that there's actually zero evidence that this is done. So the burden of proof is actually on the people who are... But as you know, with most conspiracy theories, they don't have any proof. They're just saying, well, you just gotta know, you just gotta read between the lines, you know. People imagine these backroom deals that somehow DC and Marvel are competing with each other, and there's these shady deals going on behind the scenes where DC is paying critics to support them, and Marvel's paying other critics to support them, and so forth. By the way, the reason for this conspiracy theory is simply so that you can dismiss someone else's viewpoint, right? If you like a movie and you see that a critic hates it, you can just say, oh, well, you only think that because you're biased, or you're just being paid to say that. And then you can just dismiss it without having to talk about the actual film. But you got to think about it. Why would someone want to be a critic if they weren't allowed to share their genuine opinion about a movie or TV show? I mean, think about that for a minute. Like, I want to be a movie critic, but I don't really want to give you my own opinion. It wouldn't pay that much. Being bribed by the movie companies, you could get a better job doing something else than doing that. It's not like you can make a lucrative career out of getting these cash injections from the movie companies. And then just think about the logistics of it for a minute. How exactly would a bribe go down here? You just send an email to a random critic and then hope that the critic doesn't expose you for doing it? Or would you rather do it with a phone call? Maybe some clandestine meeting in some out-of-the-way place? Or would you rather do it at some party? This is a stupid risk that a studio would take. I mean, why would the studio want to get caught in attempted bribery just so they could sway one single critic's opinion? And then do this over and over again and hope they wouldn't get caught. Now, you might say, well, it isn't like an actual bribe, but there are other ways that the movie industry can lobby critics. So, for example, and this, by the way, this is, we do know this happens sometimes, where you invite critics to swanky parties or something like that, or give them other perks, arrange special press screenings for critics in these special screening rooms, or offering to pay for travel to special events or something like that. Maybe you can sway them that way. But even in these cases, if you weren't explicit about it, the critic, of course, can still do whatever they want. Let's say you're a critic and you have an opinion about a movie and you think it sucked. Okay? How easy is it going to be to convince you? How much money would it take to get you to say that it was awesome? Or vice versa. I don't think you're going to find many people that are going to do that. Think about some of the major movie studios who have put out movies. All right, these are movie studios with lots of money. Let's say Batman versus Superman, for example. And it got a terrible critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. Right? Really low. Now, why didn't they pay off the critics in this case? This was a very important movie for them. They really wanted it to succeed. Why were no critics paid off for it? Why did it get such a low rating? Because they don't do that. That's why. And even more ridiculous is the idea that you would pay off a critic to give a low rating to a movie. Like movie studios care so much that their competitors' movies fail, that they're going to spend tons of money to pay off hundreds of critics in order to get people not to go to their competitor's movie. That just is highly unrealistic. Wait, here's the difference, though, between the critic score and the audience score. Most professional critics have to go see and review movies whether they're attracted to the movie or not. Audiences, on the other hand, they're only going to go to a movie that they feel like paying for. They want to see it. They're willing to dish over money for it. So there's a big difference there. Critics will go see it no matter what, but audiences are going to go see it only if they want to. And even more importantly, critics are actually going to see the movie, but you know that the people in the audience score don't have to. None of these sites require users to prove that they've actually seen the film or the TV show. You don't have to watch a single minute of it, and you can still rate it. All you have to do is register for an account on the site, and then you can rate it. And you can say whatever you want about it. You can go in and rate a season of Doctor Who, never having watched a single episode in that season whatsoever. The data for the audience score would likely skew to favor the opinions of specific people. First of all, people who use that website. Rotten Tomatoes audience scores are from people who use Rotten Tomatoes. All right? People who feel like registering for an account there and using the site. It also is going to favor those who are invested in the outcome of the score. You want to see the score go up or go down, you're going to be more likely to vote. So audience scores are easier to affect. People who are unhappy with the score as it's sitting there, and they know they have power to change it, are going to go in and try to change it. So let's say they think it's too high, they're going to try and go in and make it lower. Let's say they think it's too low, they're going to go in and try to make it higher. So trolls who want to sink a score can do so. And they have been known to do so, even for finding the concept of a film offensive. So we have the example of like Black Panther or Ghostbusters with the all-female Ghostbusters. Both of those movies were getting low audience scores before they even came out. So we know that people were rating them before even seeing the movies. And people are even more likely to rate a TV season before it finishes because, it airs over a period of time, and you watch a couple episodes, you're ready to get your opinion out there. There are people who are rating Doctor Who Series 11 before it even came out, and there are people who were rating it before it finished. I mean, there were thousands of scores before it even finished. But, of course, people can also artificially inflate scores, too. What I'm saying here is that the potential for falsification of the audience score is very high. I think we can reasonably assume that people who are motivated to enter an audience score on a website like this are people who feel very strongly about whatever it is that they're rating, either in a positive way or in a negative way. But people who don't care aren't putting in their scores. People who don't care about Rotten Tomatoes aren't putting in their scores. Even if you tried to fix it, I mean, you really couldn't. If Rotten Tomatoes required people, say, to pass a quiz on the movie before they rated it to prove that they went to see it, the score still would not be reliable. Just the very way that the audience score is collected is in itself unscientific and biased. Let me explain. Ratings and scores, as I mentioned at the outset, are what we call sample statistics, right? They're making an estimate of what the population's opinion is based on sample data. Now, only a census surveys everybody. Sample statistics hope to gauge the feelings of everyone by taking a sample. So the accuracy of a sample statistic is affected by the way that the sample is gathered. A good sample is representative, and a bad sample is not representative. Because the sample has to represent the attributes of the group of people that you're trying to measure. Audience score surveys are examples of what we call non-probability sampling methods. And there are two main types of non-probability sampling methods, voluntary samples and convenience samples. And Rotten Tomatoes is kind of both. A voluntary sample is made up of people who self-select into a survey. So these would be people with a strong interest in the topic of the survey. They're the ones that choose to take part. So for example, if CNN wants to do an online poll, that's a volunteer sample. It's a sample chosen by the viewers, not by any administrator. The results just come in as people volunteer. A convenience sample is another type of non-probability sample. That's just made up of people who are easy to reach. Right? Let's say a pollster goes into a mall and just happens to choose whoever they pass by in the mall. It's convenient. There are problems with that as well because it isn't representative. It's just a convenience sample. They're easy to reach. And it's the same way with Rotten Tomatoes. It's people who are on Rotten Tomatoes. It's a convenience sample. These collection methods are biased. Voluntary response bias is a known bias in statistical sampling. Convenience sample bias is a known bias in statistics. These are what statisticians avoid at all costs because they know that their scores are going to come out wrong. BARB ratings, AI scores, those are collected using probability sampling. Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic use probability sampling to a certain degree for their critics' scores. Although there's selection bias there because the way that they choose their critics shows that this is what we call undercoverage. Undercoverage occurs when some members of the population are inadequately represented in the sample, and that's probably what happens here with the critics' scores because people complain that the critics are not representing a wide variety of opinions. So there is some undercoverage here, and that's kind of selection bias. But the BARB ratings and the AI scores and the Nielsen ratings, they all use random sampling. Okay, it's a procedure for sampling from a population in which the selection of a sample is based on chance. First of all, it has to be random, but also that every element of the population has a known probability of being selected. Okay, it eliminates biases. You know who you're getting, and you know what demographic they come from. You can make assessments about the larger population from the smaller sample if it is representative. Unrepresentative samples are not accurate. It's as simple as that. So what demographic does the audience score represent? It doesn't represent fans of the show or movie. It doesn't represent people who saw the movie. It doesn't represent the population of any specific country or region or gender or anything. It represents only people invested in voting on Rotten Tomatoes. That's the demographic. But it's a meaningless one. It's useless. The audience scores don't account for uninvested persons. People who realize that the audience score is bogus are not likely to vote, right? If you realize that, hey, it means nothing, you're not going to put your vote in because you're not invested in it. What that means is the audience score reflects the opinions of those who believe that the audience score means something. And those would be the people who know very little about statistics. All right, now, with all of that taken into consideration, which ones of these figures can tell us whether an episode of Doctor Who or a season of Doctor Who was good? Trick question. None of them. The way to tell if an episode of Doctor Who is good is by watching it, and if you like it, it's good, and if you don't, it's bad. After all, opinions are subjective. And when it comes to your opinions, all that matters is what you think about it. Are you really going to love an episode because other people love it? Come on. So let me rephrase the question. Which ones of these figures can tell us whether an episode or season of Doctor Who is successful? Is there a way definitively to tell if audiences loved or hated the show? Before I answer, let me just say that this only matters up to a point. I come from a time when a small minority of people liked Doctor Who, and we didn't care what other people thought. I realize it's a different time, but I think not caring what most people think about a show is still the best approach, unless it gets to a point where the show might be canceled. Then it could be a concern. So, to answer the question, It's clearly easier to judge success in the UK because that is where most of the reliable figures can be had because they are calculated scientifically. A well-informed fan would base their judgment on whether the show is successful on the testimony of the BARB ratings, specifically the consolidated figures and the chart position, plus the AI score. For the US, you'd look at the Nielsens for BBC America's performance. I'm not sure how much that is to be weighted. Remember, success is important insofar as it affects BBC decision-making, including whether the show is renewed and who runs it. Is Rotten Tomatoes, or IMDb, or Metacritic good for judging success? Well, that depends on whether the BBC uses it in its assessment. I don't think it does. The only score on there that is even somewhat representative is the critics' score. But as we've discussed, the percentage is misleading and probably suffers from undercoverage. Reading the actual reviews is more helpful. The BBC may read those, I don't know. In regards to reviews, by the way, as a fan, I much prefer fan reviews. So I go to the blogs and to the YouTubers and to the podcasts. These aren't representative, but at least with a full review, you can hear opinions about why fans like or don't like an episode, or what parts of an episode they like or don't like. The more nuanced the reviews, the better. But these are not sources the BBC uses to judge whether the show is successful. Anyone who uses any of the ratings to forward a narrative, such as that everyone agrees with them or something like that, or to promote an agenda, like let's get the show canceled or fire the showrunner, or who cherry picks data or cherry picks reviews to do the same things, that's called selection bias, is not someone that you can trust for reliable information, especially if they're using the least reliable and most unscientific score of them all. They're either ignorant of how the scores work, or they're BSing you. Even if you agree with their assessment of the show, just keep in mind that you can't use ratings to prove your assessment is correct, because it's personal judgment. The only reason why a fan would even be interested in the ratings is to try and guess what decisions the BBC might make in future. But they will eventually tell us, you know. Let me ask you this. Do you know any professional reviewer that in their review says, and look at what all these other reviewers say. See, it shows I'm right. No one does that. Right? The pros don't do that because it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. You're going to write what you think no matter what. And yet there are people, especially on YouTube, who do that. Okay? It's very amateurish. Sometimes in order to hide the fact that they're doing that, they'll say, well, I'm just reporting the news. But you know what? The Rotten Tomatoes audience score going up or down is not newsworthy. Nobody cares except people who believe in it. The audience score isn't even news to the staff that work at Rotten Tomatoes. That's how unnewsworthy it is. Anyway, I hope that helped clear a few things up. If you think I made an error or missed something, please let me know in the comments section below. Until next time, this is Dave Ringo. Safe travels in time and space.